Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. Awesome. I can see everybody joining. Welcome to our webinar today with the incredible Jivana Heyman. We are very, very excited for this webinar. So as you're popping in here, the topic today is teaching mixed level classes with Jivana. As you're hopping in, just let us know that the chat is working. Tell us where in the world are you? And maybe tell us, who do you serve in your business as well, in your teaching? Who is in your classes? We would love to know. As we move through the webinar today, a couple of bits of housekeeping before I hand everything over to Jivana. Drop your questions in the chat throughout. We will try to get to them. There will be a Q&A at the end. The replay will come out just as soon as we can get it sorted. There'll be a little discount and links in the chat for a discount on Offering Tree. And Jivana had some things to share too about upcoming offerings. And I'll give you my little overview of who Offering Tree are in case you haven't heard of us. We are an all-in-one software for yoga teachers and yoga studios and people all across the wellness business spectrum. You can schedule your classes, take payments, have a website, have a blog, send emails out, reminders to your class list. There's so much that you can do. And we're really excited to partner with Jivana as well on Jivana's podcast. So Jivana is one of our favorite partners. Today, you can get 15% off a plan or 50% off the first 3 months of a monthly plan. And I'll drop the links for that in the chat. So without further ado, I'll stop my screen share. I'll take a quick look in the chat. Hi, Jenny from Springboro. Ottawa, Canada, US. Hi, everybody. Iran. Hi, Sahar. I think that's the first time we've had somebody from Iran. Florida. Yes, and Jivana, take it away. I'll keep walking through
Okay,
these.
thank you, Jeanette. Thanks for having me. Thank you to Offering Tree for hosting me and for all your support and supporting the podcast. Hi, everyone. Thanks for saying hello in the chat. It's great to have people from all over joining us. And hi, if you're watching the recording too. I always want to say hello to the people watching later because you're important also. So thanks for being here. I'm Jivana, and let's see, my pronouns are he and him, and I'm joining you from Santa Barbara, California, which is Chumash land. And I run Accessible Yoga, which is an organization really focused on supporting yoga teachers in making their offerings accessible and reaching as many people as possible who are interested in practicing yoga. And for today's class, I want to share a lot of details about doing that. But before I do, I also wanted to give kind of a reason why that's important. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of like an overview of the importance of accessibility and why we need to teach mixed level classes and how important that is in the yoga space. In particular, in the US, we're going through a lot here politically. And recently there's been attacks on DEI in particular, and I thought we could maybe look at that. What does that mean, and what does that mean in the yoga world? Because I feel like teaching mixed level means we make our classes work for many different people in the same space, right? We welcome people of all abilities, all ages, all backgrounds into yoga, and that's really essential, right? So I have a slide about that. I wanted to look at why DEI, and I'm going to call it DEIA, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is so important in yoga. So this slide, there's a photo of what I call a mixed level class. So I'll talk about what is a mixed level class in a second. In this image, there's someone practicing, they're doing Cobra pose, but there's a standing version, two versions in the chair, one in a wheelchair and one in a hard folding chair, and then someone on the mat. And they're all doing different versions of really the same practice. And that's really what I'm thinking of when I talk about mixed level. I mean really mixed level, like really mixing up all abilities in the same group. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in yoga is important because it really gets to the heart of what yoga is about, which is about this ability to connect with spirit. And that's not only spirit in ourselves, but seeing it in the world around us and in other people. And I have a quote from the Bhagavad Gita: "The yogi who perceives the essential oneness everywhere naturally feels the pleasure or pain of others as their own." And I feel like that kind of compassion is really at the heart of accessible yoga, and I think at the heart of yoga in general. And I want to bring that back to yoga. I feel like maybe it's missing a little bit. Oops, there we go. So I just want to look at those 4 words for a minute about diversity. So in the yoga tradition, there's this very, very famous saying, unity in diversity. And the idea is that we see the connection and we also see the difference at the same time. And that's a lot of what we're doing when we're teaching mixed level classes, which is we're creating a unity among the group. So there's a similar practice that's happening, but we're also embracing the diversity of people's experience and practice. So a mixed level class doesn't mean that people are all doing the same thing. It actually means that they're kind of, each person is kind of riffing on a theme, right? That there's a basic underlying theme, like a cobra pose, for example, as the theme in this photo, but everyone is doing their own variation on that theme. Equity, of course, is the essence of yoga, which I mentioned a minute ago, which is that we all share the same spirit, which is called Atmana Purusha in Sanskrit. And the basic teachings of yoga say that actually, if you look at like the classical yoga teachings, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it basically is about trying to differentiate what part of me is spirit and what part of me is creation or nature, right? Which includes my body and mind. And so a lot of our yoga practices are about coming back to the part of us that's spirit, that's never changing, right? The eternal self or the true self. And that true self or spirit is the same in all beings. And then inclusion is simply the act of yoga in action, right? Of acting in a way that shares that compassionate view of the world, that we're all connected, right? And a mixed level class, to me, is kind of the minimum, right? The least we can do to act on inclusion, which is to make everyone welcome in our yoga spaces. And of course, accessibility is the heart of my work. I mean, that's why it's called accessible yoga. It's really not just about accessibility, which is often connected to the disability community, but also about giving people access to the heart of yoga, right? To the heart of these teachings. Anyone who's interested can practice. And as an organization, we're committed to that, to making the teachings available to anyone who's interested in practicing them. In particular, we focus on ableism, and I wanted to just pull out that because that thread here, because I think the big issue with teaching mixed levels is that yoga sometimes has an ableist overtone. And ableism is basically this, like I have a definition on the right here. It's the idea that there's one way to be in a body that is better than other ways. And it's the concept that people with disabilities need to be fixed or changed. And unfortunately, we see a lot of ableism in yoga, and that is really interfering with our ability to express yoga in the way I just described, right? It interferes with accessibility. Part of the ableism is coming out of the fact that we sometimes think that yoga is only a physical practice, and so that we think advanced yoga is getting better at doing these physical practices. But physical practice is just one really important part of yoga, and there's so much more. It's essentially a spiritual practice. And so yoga is really there for us throughout our lives, as whether we're disabled or if we get injured or ill, or even as we get older and die, yoga is still there for us. It doesn't mean we're any less advanced or any less better at yoga. And I think that's an issue to consider in terms of the way we share these teachings. So I have a few ideas here, and then we'll get on to the topic of mixed level, which is reducing hierarchy. So when you're teaching a mixed level class in particular, I think you have to be careful to avoid the idea of hierarchy in practice, meaning that, quote, more physically advanced is better. So a hierarchy is when you say that, that's what you're striving for. I mean, it's fun to be competitive a little bit and to bring the kind of joy of practice, but to do it in a way that celebrates everyone, whether they're practicing in a chair or on the mat, they need to be equally celebrated. And to recognize that every practice in yoga exists on a spectrum. So like what I mean by that is that like cobra pose I showed before, or any practice that you come up with can be done on a spectrum of subtlety to physicality, meaning we could practice mentally or we can practice in the body. And nowhere on that spectrum is better or worse than the other place. They're all valid and equal, actually. And one of the beautiful things about teaching a mixed level class is that we can find skills to actually integrate all the students together and create a unified yoga experience, even if students are in different places in their practice, right? They're doing very different things. You can still bring in this feeling that there's connection. And that's one of the things we'll focus on today, is how to do that. How do you create a unified yoga experience where people are practicing differently in the same space? And I think I shared some of this already. So being conscious of the language we use, and well, I'm going to talk about that a bit today. And also, of course, trauma-informed language and content is really important. That means that we recognize that everyone has some form of trauma. And this is a whole topic that I can't really get into in detail, but I'll just say trauma is a part of our lives, and all of our students may have experienced it. And so we need to be sensitive in the way we teach. In particular, I think it has to do with giving people choice and sharing power with them. Because I think that the thing about trauma is it's often about taking away choice. It's about making people do things they don't want to do. And so within a yoga space, you have to make sure that people always have a choice of options or to stop doing something if they don't want to. And that's what agency is too. Agency is giving people back their inherent power over themselves. And in doing so, when we can connect people back to their inherent power, right? The fact that they are the source of their own power, their own happiness is within them, which is, again, that's the teaching of yoga, right? That we have what we need inside. If we can remind people of that through yoga practice, it can help them throughout their lives. And so I think, we're seeing amazing research on the benefits of yoga. And I think so much of it is happening on a subtle level. Maybe I'll stop for 1 second. But I think so much of the benefit of yoga occurs because of this subtle thing that's happening that's hard to really define or to measure. And we see this in a lot of yoga research, that people are getting better from whatever condition they're studying. And they often think it's because of a certain practice or a certain thing, but really I think it's way more subtle than that. I think that yoga is connecting us back to ourselves. And that's incredibly powerful. And has so much benefit just in doing so. I don't know if that made sense, but hopefully. All right. Thanks, Sinead. It's nice to see you there on the screen. All right.
Yeah, and I realized I didn't introduce myself as well. Let me take a second to say my
Okay.
name is Sinead. I see another Sinead in the chat, actually. My name is Sinead. My pronouns are she, her, and I am also a yoga teacher as well as part of the Offering Tree team, and I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I love learning from Jivana. Sorry, Jivana, I just wanted to pop in and say that.
That's okay. Thank you. All right.
Dagmar says, amen to pointing out ableism, louder for the people in the back. I
Yeah,
100% agree.
it's a huge issue in yoga spaces. I think that because we focused on the physical aspect of yoga primarily, unfortunately, yoga has been perceived as being a physical practice. And it has that beautiful physical practice, but it's so much more. What's so great about yoga is that we can use the body as a vehicle to connect with spirit. And I think that's what makes it so special and maybe so different than a lot of other spiritual practices, because it's so grounded. It's so, what's the word? Something you can, tangible, right? Something you can do with your body. It makes it so accessible, actually. That's why I often say asana is what makes yoga both accessible and inaccessible at the same time. Because it's tangible and something you can do, but also we tend to judge ourselves for it. And or other people even judge us, right? That we're not good at yoga, or we think, oh, I can't do that because the imagery that I see in the media about yoga or on social media is so physically intense, the practice that's portrayed. And when it's just doesn't have to be that way. So on this slide, I have a photo of another mixed level practice. This is a tree pose. People doing variations standing and seated in chairs at the same time. And so this is what I'm really looking for when I teach mixed level classes, is really trying to create spaces where people can come together. People of different abilities can feel welcome into one space, rather than dividing students always by level. I feel like there's a kind of an underlying issue in yoga where we have levels like beginner or advanced that focuses so much on physical ability rather than, you know, I don't know. My experience has been mostly outside of yoga studios, focusing on groups where people are all at different places physically, and that's totally fine. And we can celebrate that and enjoy it. And I feel like part of this talk that I want to give you about how to do it, how to teach mixed level, is to say that kind of an underlying theme here is creating a culture of acceptance in your classes, which is very, very challenging to do. And I don't mean to put so much pressure on you as the teacher, but I think just reflect on that. You know, what are my subtle, what are the subtle cues? Maybe I'll stop actually. What are the subtle cues that I'm sharing with my students about yoga in the way that I talk about it, in the way that I portray it as a person? You know what I mean? So sometimes there's beliefs that we have as teachers that, you know, that maybe we're not good at something, you know. So like say maybe you're demonstrating a pose and you say, oh, I'm no good at this one, or so, you know, you make little self-criticism and judgment. I think really reflect on that. Like what do you think yoga means to you? And maybe I'll ask that for a second. If we can just, if you're here and you're in the chat, maybe you could tell me, what is yoga to you? Can you give me a short definition of what yoga is to you? I know that's a big question, but there, you're already doing it. I see some community and connection. Yeah, so I think that's a beautiful definition. Coming home to myself. That's beautiful too. That's awesome. Being home in my body and connecting mind, body, and breath. Stilling of the turbulences of my mind. So Dagmar is giving a classic definition from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. A deep connection to myself. It's a state of feeling alive, introspection. I mean, those are all beautiful, and I totally agree with them all. And I'm going to say there's barely any discussion about asana. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if you mention the body in your definition, it doesn't feel to me like you're defining yoga as doing extreme asana, you know, like being able to do handstand or shoulder stand for a particular length of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think these subtle approaches, this idea of connection, of alignment, of coming home to yourself, I think to me, I don't know, I mean, I would say I would define yoga according to different sources. Like I could say, well, yoga according to the Yoga Sutras, yoga according to the Gita. But according to me, I guess yoga is about having a relationship with myself. And you know, I think that's really what we want. We want to support students in having that relationship. So I guess in the kind of subtle background of teaching a mixed level class is that you're creating an environment that's welcoming and encourages people to come home to themselves, to be accepting and kind to themselves, regardless of what their practice looks like. Because I think the thing about teaching mixed level classes is there's a little bit of a danger here. And the danger being that if you start mixing levels together, where you have students on the mat practicing what might seem like complex or challenging poses, and you have people in chairs doing what may seem more gentle or quote easier variations, they might feel bad about themselves, or the other students might think, oh, I'm so advanced. You know, I think that there's a little bit of a danger in a mixed level environment that you're actually enforcing hierarchy. So just be conscious of that. All right, now to teach mixed level classes, we can get right into it. And I have quite a few thoughts about it. And it depends a lot on the environment, but I'll just say the first point on this slide, it says prepare separately, practice together. This is kind of the motto I have, or like the theme I have for this skill that I think is most useful for yoga teachers, which is to find a way to prepare separately, but practice together. And that has to do with integrating chair and mat in particular. So that if I have students practicing in the same space, in the same class, someone on a mat and someone on a chair, I want to create an experience where we have part of the practice is happening together, but I have to recognize that my instruction has to be distinctly different for each of those variations. And so the approach, I think, is pretty straightforward, which is to consider that the preparation for the pose will be different. Usually the foundation of the pose is going to be different. But I want to find some time or some instruction that can be the same, right? Let me say it another way. So what I think happens sometimes when we're teaching mixed level class is we'll teach, say I have a student on the mat and a student in the chair. I'll teach the pose to the student on the mat. And then I'll say, okay, if you're in the chair, now do the pose like this. And I'll teach it to them sequentially, like one and then the other. And I'm actually saying I would avoid doing that if possible. And instead try to find a way to actually integrate the experience so that students have some time where they're practicing together. And the way to do that is to teach the preparation separately. So I would say, for example, and this is the example I have I have a short video I can share in a minute, but say we're going to do cobra pose, like on the mat, lie on the belly with the hands under the shoulders, the forehead on the floor. In the chair, maybe place a bolster on your lap and lean forward with the hands on the bolster and the head down. So that's two separate instructions. I'm preparing separately the mat and then the chair. And then I say together, for everyone, let's exhale, ground down. Inhale, lengthen your spine and slowly raise up your head, neck, and chest. So that there's actually some part of my instruction that's unified for everyone to practice together. And that, again, that's quite different than sequentially teaching different variations in a pose. And I simply call that prepare separately, practice together. So hopefully that is clear. Let me know. And I have some more thoughts about it, but that's the kind of the theme of this section I wanted to share. So we have to do that, you really have to plan ahead. You need to have thought of poses that you could practice on the mat and in the chair. And you have to really work through in your mind, like what is the version I'm going to have people do on the mat, and what is the version I'm going to have them do in the chair? And maybe spend time yourself trying to do both if you can, to do both practices and see how they feel in your body, or to work with people and see how they do in those different variations, to kind of just get comfortable with these particular variations before you try to do them together. It can be a lot to do two things at once. This is a little bit like, what is it? Like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, because you're basically doing two different things at the same time, right? A chair and a mat class mixed together. Of course, I mean, you could approach variations on the mat in a similar way, but I love the idea of integrating people who practice in chairs into mat classes. I think that is one way to really address ableism in yoga and create diverse yoga spaces. Which, by the way, I don't know, this is a bit of an aside, but there's research that shows that that we actually learn better in diverse spaces. They did research on kids in elementary schools, comparing how well they learned when they segregated kids, the disabled kids, into separate classrooms versus when they integrated the disabled kids into the quote regular classroom. And everyone performed better when they had integrated classes. And I think it's the same in yoga. I actually think that we learn more about humanity and more about yoga when we have a group of people who don't always move like we do or look like we do. I actually think we can expand our understanding of what yoga is. So I feel like there's tremendous benefit here, not just for you as a teacher, which is you're expanding your skills, potentially reaching more students, but you're also widening what the experience is for the students. And it's really helpful for them, I think, to see the different options available. All right, so going back to the practical tools again. So we have prepare separately, practice together. The way you do that is you find the common movement. So if someone's practicing in a chair and practicing on the mat, hopefully there's some common movement there. If it's the same pose, right? So there would be some common movement. There'll be very different, there may be some poses that have different things going on too, because of the orientation in space, for example. You know, on one pose, you may be lying down, the other you could be sitting up, but hopefully the interaction is relatively similar. And generally we start with the foundation of the pose, which is kind of how we start with every asana anyway, which is you want to make sure the foundation is there and then you build from there, right? Okay. Having a similar orientation in the room helps. So this sounds kind of some simple idea, but I want to tell you from experience that having people facing in the same direction makes a big difference, because you can get easily confused about direction here. I also don't necessarily mirror when I teach in this way, because I just feel like it's just an additional thing that confuses me. You're already teaching two very different things at the same time. So having students in the chair and students in the mat in the same direction, facing in the same way, can really make a difference. And so just keep that in mind. Also, you want to avoid externally oriented directions. So for example, like rather than using directions in the room, like raising the arms towards the ceiling, or, you know, um, or even reaching towards the floor, you want to actually use internally oriented directions, like raising the arms overhead, or lengthening your spine, or bending back, you know, using cues that have to do with movements in the body itself that could apply regardless of whether you're seated or standing or lying down, can really help to make this a lot smoother for you. And it's funny because you need to like really watch yourself, maybe even record yourself and listen back if you're willing to do that to your teaching, to get a sense of what you do. You may not even be aware of the ways that you do this. And then I also want to just kind of give you an out, which is that try not to get too stressed about it. If it's overwhelming, you can always just find a way to have people breathe together, which means that even if you've had to teach the poses sequentially, like if you're on the mat, do this, if you're in the chair, do that, that's okay, as long as you just take a moment to say, you know, let's breathe together into this pose before coming out, or you can have them come out together even. Sometimes it's just too hard to figure it out. And I'll tell you, it really depends on the pose. Some poses are really easy to do like this, and some are quite challenging. All right, also, if you're demonstrating, which I think is a really important tool when you're teaching yoga, generally you want to demonstrate the more gentle version, or I would say that could be the chair version. So if you're teaching chair and mat at the same time, as a teacher, you'd want to stay in the chair and show that version, because students tend to want to do what the teacher's doing. They see you as the kind of the model, or like the goal. And so they naturally will just copy you. And if the teacher tends to always do the more challenging variation in a pose or a practice, that encourages the students to do that as well. So even if you're offering 2 or 3 versions of a mat practice and you're demonstrating, I would tend to demonstrate the more gentle one, because there's just a natural competitiveness that we have. And also there's a natural kind of eagerness to please the teacher. I always find it funny, like if you're teaching, have you ever noticed that if you offer 2 or 3 variations of a pose, almost all the people will try and do the more challenging one? That is just human nature. Yes, Shannon, have you noticed that?
Yes. Yes, I definitely have. I teach like older clients as well. So I have to work hard at pulling back from that final version of the pose that I might take them to, because they do tend to mimic. And sometimes it's a hearing issue too. If they haven't heard me correctly,
Yeah.
they just see what I'm demonstrating and go to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is funny. Sometimes, um, I'll like scratch my head and students are scratching their head, because I think that's what they're supposed to do if they're not really following my verbal instruction. Um,
Mhm.
that's another issue for sure. But yeah, so I think trying to find a way to encourage people to listen to themselves, that's really where we're going in yoga anyway. Interoception. Interoception is the ability to listen to inner cues, like your own physical sensations within the body. And I think that's what we're emphasizing the most in yoga is listen to your body. How does it feel? But for many people, they don't know if they're new to yoga or for whatever reason. Trauma actually is a reason that you lose interoceptive ability. And
Mhm.
so it can be a lot to ask of people. And so they'll just want you to tell them what to do and they'll try and follow you. And if you show them 3 variations, they'll do the most challenging one always. So I think it's like up to you to show that you equally value all those variations and that you don't necessarily think the more challenging one is better. So demonstration is important. I'd say you can demonstrate, I see someone said you can demonstrate all of them and go back, but it depends on how much time you have and your skill in demonstration. If I'm doing chair and mat, I generally stay in the chair and just demo the chair versions. Another thing you can do if you're feeling skilled is you could demo one variation and verbally teach another. So say maybe this is more for something like a flow, or like a sun salutation, which is a flow, which I'll talk about more in a minute. If you're trying to integrate flows, there's more challenges here. You can't necessarily use my technique of prepare separately, practice together. You may not have time to prepare separately if you're moving quickly from one pose to another. So I have some points here for integrating flows. One is, first of all, slow it down. Slow down your flow. You don't always have to do one movement per breath. You could actually do a flow that's much slower where you pause for a few breaths at each pose and then still make it a flow. I think that can be a really great way to learn something. Another way you could teach a flow, I didn't put it on here, but is you could teach the same flow. So you could do like a sequence of however many poses, like 5 poses. You could teach it through at different variations. So you can teach it through at like a gentle version, like everyone doing it seated or everyone doing it using the chair as a prop. Or you can teach another variation, then that's a little more physically challenging. And you can say, if you like that first version, stay there. Hopefully they will. And then continue to teach it. So you're repeating the same flow, but at different quote levels of intensity. So you maybe are, it's not exactly a ladder flow because sometimes a ladder will be adding additional things. I'm not saying you really add anything, but maybe using less props, using less support in the other variations you're showing, or moving from a chair to a standing variation. And that way, hopefully people will see that they have a variation that's accessible to them that they can continue to do as you move on. Another way you can do an integrated flow, mat and chair, is where you have the same leg position. So because the foundation of the pose is so important, if you build that foundation first, like you have people in like warrior 2, like that leg position, and then you do flow series from there, you can focus on people in the chair, basically mostly moving their torso and arms, and then the people on the mat could do maybe a slightly more movement. That can be one way to do it. So there's a few different ways. Integrated flows are definitely more challenging than a more static asana series. So it really depends on the style of yoga you're teaching, I think, in terms of how the techniques that you need here. My background is traditional hatha yoga, where we do some sun salutations, but generally we do more slow poses that we hold for a little bit longer and pause between. And that creates space for this kind of instruction. But I understand these days that flow is like the thing, so I get it. It can be more challenging. All right, so I wanted to show an example. Let's see. I don't know if yeah, I'm going to take some questions a little later. I want to show a video I have of teaching a few poses. And then I also want to teach you today a little flow. Let's see if I can do this. I thought, because I don't have people on screen other than Sinead, because I don't have you all on screen here, I thought it'd be easier to just show a video of a class I taught. I found this one from a few years ago because I have permission. I realized I have a lot of videos, but I didn't really have permission to use them here. So this one I do because it was for Yoga Journal. And I pulled out a section. Can you see that? And it was so long ago, I didn't even have a beard. So I might fast forward through parts of this, but there's basically, this is teaching a student in the chair on the mat at the same time, starting with tree pose. For tree pose, if you're practicing on the mat, if you don't mind standing, coming to standing, you can take a moment in standing mountain. And we can all prepare by finding a block. So maybe everyone can use a block. So if you're standing, you can put a block between your feet, and I'll demonstrate in the chair too. Yeah, and in the chair, in the chair, we're gonna move the block, we're gonna put it out to the side of let's put on the left side of the chair, maybe pointing away from you on the flat side. Yeah, even can go a little further over to the side. That's fine like that, between your between your feet there. And so ground down again, we're gonna shift the weight to the right foot, and if you're standing, you wanna soften the right leg. And then raise the left leg and bring it out to the side and place the toes on the block. See if that's comfortable for you. And you can do the same thing. Yeah, same thing standing. And check your balance. You can spot with the eyes, looking on the floor in front of you or across the room, and bring the palms together at the chest. See if you're comfortable and balanced there. Good. Now inhale, lengthen the spine. Good. Exhale, grounding down into the right foot. And in the chair, you can even lean forward slightly, put some weight into the right foot. Next inhale, you can raise the arms and you can keep them together, hands together, or you can separate them apart. And then we're going to imagine here that we're a tree in a storm. So this is how we deal with life, right? You have to stay balanced in a storm. So see if you can feel your branches moving and you're staying steady. It's harder to balance when you move, isn't it? Yeah, good. Strong trees, grounding down through your roots. Okay, one more breath, stretch up. And then exhale, slowly coming down, bring the hands back down. Good. And then release the hands, and we'll release that left foot down, and we'll do the other side. So in the chair, we can bring the block to the other side. And yeah, we'll come back to our mountain pose again. Shift the weight to your left foot, soften the left knee, and we'll bend the right knee and rotate it out to the right. Sitting up nice and tall. Okay, is that comfortable? Palms together at the chest, spot with the eyes. Exhale, and then as you inhale, leaning forward slightly and raise the arms. Good, coming up into your tall tree. Good, and then let's see if the wind can come, if you can keep balance there in that steady in the storm, right? That's what we're doing. Staying steady in the storm without falling over. Good. Take another breath here. Inhale, lengthening back up. And exhale, slowly grounding, coming back down. And then release the hands, release that right leg. Come back to mountain. You can take the block away. And we're going to move into Warrior Two pose. So for Warrior Two, let's see, if you're in the chair, if you could turn to the side. So we're going to start, you can turn to the right side. And if it's comfortable for you, you can bring your left hip off the chair and you're going to hold the back of the chair behind you. And then standing, you're going to turn, you can turn this way. Yeah. And maybe take the blanket away. And I can help you. And you can stand with the legs wide apart. Good. So comfortable distance apart, about, can they come a little further, a little wider? And here on the chair, you can place a block under the knee if you want to feel more sturdy. Is that good? You can also use a bolster there. All right. And then what we'll do in the chair, if it's comfortable, you're going to release the back hand if you feel steady. You feel steady there? You can release the back hand. You're going to turn the torso towards the front. And we're going to bring our arms out at shoulder height. So let's all do that. So arms out at shoulder height. Oh yes, and you bent your knee. Thank you. To bend that right knee. Inhale, lengthen the arms out. Good. And then we can look over the right hand and feel like a strong warrior facing your fear, right? That's what we're trying to do with warrior, facing the fear. And in the chair, we're going to really make sure that we're not falling, that we're steady, both feet pressing down, knee into the block. And standing, you want to be aware of that back foot. Yeah, putting some energy into the outside of that back foot. Front knee is bent. Good. Take another breath, exhaling down. Inhaling, lengthening the spine, extending the arms. And exhale, release. Let's release. Good. You can release the hands, straighten the leg. And we'll come back to face forward and then turn to the other side. So you can turn. In the chair, you can rotate. Actually, you can leave the block, I guess. And, standing, you can have a wider stance if you like. You can have the, you might want to try having your right foot further to the right. Would that help? Yeah, so that the feet, you don't have to have that instep to heel alignment. You can have a wider stance. All right, so in the chair, the right knee is on the block. Is that comfortable? You can hold the back of the chair to be steady. Good. And in the chair, you're going to release the back of the chair and turn face forward. Let's extend our arms out at shoulder height. Inhale, lengthen the spine. Exhale, bending that right knee. Yeah, good. That's great, Natalie. Looking over the left hand. Breathing. So still breathing. Inhale, lengthen the spine. Exhale, feel firmly grounded. Like a strong warrior, you can send energy out through the hands, energy through your feet, grounding down. Good. Shoulders relaxed away from the ears. One more breath. And as you exhale, you can release the hands, straighten the front knee if you're standing, and come back to mountain. So you can face forward again. That was fun. Well, for me, it's hard to listen to myself teach, but
No, that was great. I really like that.
yeah. So it's funny watching it. You can see what I was talking about. I mostly did it. Some places I kind of got confused, but this idea of preparing separately so that you might have a different foundation or position for the legs in the chair and on the mat. But there's a lot you can do with the upper body and with the whole kind of movement and energy of the pose that's shared between both. And that was
Mm,
really the main thing I wanted to share in that video. But you realize it's a lot to say when you have people doing, and it's every class really, this is happening where people are doing different variations of the same practice. It's always a lot of words. And so you got to find a way to not just talk constantly. There's a lot of talking.
mm,
Um, so I don't know if you have thoughts about that. Um, yeah, you could even see at one point, one thing I noticed is that Natalie, in the first side on Warrior 2, this person standing, she knew to bend her knee because she'd been doing that practice before. And I feel like the ability to teach mixed level classes, it's so much easier with a consistent group of students or students who have some experience versus brand new students. And I almost feel like there's such a different kind of teaching that has to happen with new people versus
mm,
an ongoing group. Because in an ongoing group, you can have your students, you can say the name of a pose, and they'll pretty much know what you mean, they'll know what to do, and you can just give subtle cues to support maybe one new person or to give them some information about going a little further to kind of educate them about it. But if it's all new students or a lot of new students, there's so much basic information that you have to share. You're really starting from zero, and there's just so many words to say. So I just think
mm.
to begin to notice that in your teaching, like, is this a new group? Do I need to give all this information? Because I think for a group that has been with you for a while, you can allow for a little more spaciousness,
Yeah.
which is really
And
nice.
you can plan a little as well. Like for my class, I have one person who really needs a chair for some of the poses.
Yeah.
And as I'm planning the class, I'm already thinking of how I'll instruct how I'll do it. So when it's people you're not familiar with, you're really teaching on the fly, and you've got to give yourself some forgiveness for that kind of
Yeah.
working through it with people you don't know that well.
Yeah, and also I would say sometimes, if you have students that need extra support, you have to also realize that you only have so much time and attention that you have. So if you have a lot of new students or a lot of students who need a lot of extra support, maybe try to keep the classes smaller. Try to figure out a way to get an assistant in there. Like you don't have to do it all yourself. It's okay to need help.
Mm,
I've been to places where, I've taught like in hospitals or community centers where I've had big groups, and I just recognize that it's overwhelming. Like I just don't feel like I can safely support all the students who come sometimes. And so I would try and bring in other yoga teachers to help
mhm,
me, which can make a big difference. And the other thing about that is if you have another teacher and you're doing demonstration, you could have a second teacher or an assistant demonstrate another version of a pose, which is a
mhm,
really nice way to for visual learners, for people that need to see that, to be able to show two
mhm,
different versions visually is great. Um, I've seen that done at yoga conferences or events where they'll have, like when there's a really big group, they'll have a chair interpreter, uh, meaning they'll have like someone doing a mat practice and someone doing a chair version of that practice at the same time, which is really,
I
really
love
awesome.
that. Mhm.
All right, so I wanted to do one more thing. I hope we have time. Yeah, we have time, I think. We do one more thing. I wanted to do some sun salutations with you today. So I'm going to step back to my mat. I want to demo in the chair and instruct a standing version. So what I want to show you is that one other way to make this work, um, which is to try basically do two things at once. Maybe I'll come a little closer. The sun is right there. So there's a lot of light here. Can you see me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, I'm going to come a little closer. So I'd love for you to practice with me if you're watching. And you can choose to practice in a chair or on the mat standing. And what I'd like to demonstrate is, like I said, see if I can do it. It'll be a test. I have to get my thinking cap on to physically demonstrate a chair version and then verbally instruct the mat version at the same time. So what I would say in a class, if I had a class where students were in the chair and on the mat, I'd say, if you're sitting in a chair, watch me, right? So if you're sitting in a chair, you're going to do what I do. If you're standing on the mat, listen to my words. And so I ask them to follow one or the other, right? If it's just me and I'm teaching a flow like this. So let's begin in Tadasana. So again, in a chair, you want to find a safe position where you feel really sturdy and secure. And if you're standing on the mat, you want to stand with the feet about hip width apart, and the feet, you can spread your toes maybe and relax them down, feet really firmly planted on the floor. You could shift your weight a little bit and find your balance. And then we can all bring our palms together. So bring your palms together at your chest. And take a few breaths here. As you exhale, see if you can ground down through your feet. And as you inhale, feel length all the way up through your spine, up to the top of your head. And I'll instruct the breath as well, but you can also breathe however you want, right? It's just a suggestion. So let's begin with an exhalation here. Inhale, extend the arms out and up. Lengthen up. You can even bend back gently if you want. And then as you exhale, hinging forward at the hips, and you can bring your hands to your knees and come to a half lift, keeping the head lifted, or you can lower all the way down into a standing forward bend. It's up to you. And then we'll come into a lunge. So sending the left leg back. Let's lunge with the right knee forward. Left knee down on the floor. Inhale, lengthen your spine, looking forward. And then exhale, stepping back into downward dog. So you can bring both feet back. Press into your hands, lift your tailbone high in the air, lengthen your spine. Great. And then we'll lower the knees to the floor and the chest and chin to the floor between the hands. Exhale there. Inhale, raise up your head, neck, and chest into cobra, or you could even do upward dog if you know that practice. And then exhale, press into your hands, coming back to downward facing dog. So pressing the heels gently down, pressing into your hands, lengthening your spine. And then we're going to lunge on the other side. So you're going to bring that right knee forward. Is that right? Did I do it backwards? No, it's left knee forward. Left knee forward, lunging now. With that right leg back, right knee on the floor. Inhale, lengthen your spine. And then standing forward bend. So step the other foot forward. Hinging at the hips, standing and relaxing over the legs, or you can do a half lift if you prefer. Relaxing the breath. Exhale. And coming out, you can have the hands on the thighs, forearms out to the side, stretching back up to standing. Reach up. Inhale, and then exhale, palms together at the chest. And then release your arms. Notice how you're feeling. So how was that? That was other than that one little. I
That was
always get
great.
confused. I always get confused on one side or the other.
I do the same.
Uh, but I mean, I think you get the idea. So like you could basically demo the chair, verbally teach the mat or something like that. All right. I just wondered if there were any questions or comments. We have a few more minutes.
So Ella had a question earlier that was about levels of experience as opposed to levels of ability. So when you've got people presenting in a class who are maybe super experienced versus someone who isn't. So I'll read it out. I perceive ability and level as two different things. Ability is about strengths and challenges, whereas level is about experience. For example, someone could have multiple complex disabilities, maybe from a brain injury, but be an experienced yogi or yogini, or have very few physical challenges but have never practiced before. For me, the big challenge is having different levels of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I totally agree. I mean, obviously, someone's ability and their level of practice. And I don't know if the question is about like how we're labeling classes, but I think that's part of the confusion is that if you're labeling classes in a yoga studio, beginner, advanced, it's like which of those students would go to which practice. I've had the experience of students who have very limited mobility, or you would call it, yeah, or ability, like you would say, but have tons of experience who have been doing yoga for a very long time. And I watched my grandmother actually. She taught me yoga when I was a child, and she practiced through her 80s, and then she did less and less, before she passed away. And I remember those years when she was doing less, she couldn't really do any physical practice for a while. And I just remember thinking it's not that she's becoming less advanced. I mean, she was still growing and maturing. And that's, I think, something important for all of us to remember, that the body is temporary. And yoga is very much about that. You're very much recognizing the limitations of the body and the mind, and actually trying to get us to connect instead with spirit. That's like the whole point here. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the yoga world about what we're talking about when we talk about levels, especially the word advanced, I think is really confusing. What is an advanced yoga practitioner? I think just because you can do some extreme physical practice doesn't mean you're advanced. I remember when my daughter was little, was into gymnastics, and I think she was probably like 9 or 10 years old, and she could do everything. Like, at that age, her body was so flexible, and she was strong, and she could do all these incredible asanas and stuff. But she was all over the place. I mean, she was a kid, and she's a wild child. And I was like, wait, is she advanced? You know what I mean? It's like, I think it's really about
Yeah.
maybe reclaiming that, redefining what is yoga when you think about those kinds of things.
Oh, I love
Thanks for
that.
that great question, though.
Yeah, and Sahar has another question here. Should we as teachers be worried of what each person thinks about other people? I mean, they may think that what is this person doing with the chair in this class? That's a great point. How can we prepare a class mentally to avoid this?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important point. And I kind of started today with that because I started with a question about what kind of culture are you creating in your classes, because this is maybe the most important teaching. I find that there are yoga classes where the teacher has been successful at creating a welcoming environment and creating a sense of community. And it can be a hard job. I'm not saying it's easy to do. And within those spaces, variations and student practicing in a chair, just it feels very much like a welcomed thing. But then there's some yoga spaces that are much more, a little bit colder, maybe less welcoming, and maybe more physically based sometimes. Like they're more, I don't know, like at a gym or something where it's a lot more like, you have to keep up and you need to do what everyone else is doing. And, I think that's the issue is like and I mean, I have a lot of ideas about it, but I don't have the answer to how to create a welcoming yoga environment. One more point I just want to make about that is I think what we can do is we can teach our students that yoga is more than what you're doing with your body. It's the way you're treating other people, which is why I went and started with this DEI idea around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is that yoga students need to understand that their practice is more than what they're doing when they're moving their bodies on their mat. Their practice is how they come into the room. I mean, their practice is their whole lives. But regarding me as a teacher, if you're my student, your practice is anytime I see you, you need to be practicing. And I'm going to hold you to that. And you should hold me to that too. The way you come in and the way you talk to people in the room, how you set up your space, how you clean up, how kind and polite you are to each other. I feel like that's a big piece of yoga, is creating that supportive sangha or spiritual community that sometimes is lost. And I'll
Mhm.
tell you, there's so much benefit in creating that community. It'll bring students back for years and years, and they'll become friends and bond too, which is just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I had a question that's similar to that. In how would you, if you were in a class and you have a student that you know could benefit from using a prop like a chair,
Yeah,
how could you compassionately
yeah,
introduce that with it? Because there is that feeling of judgment or competition that they might have that, oh, I don't want to be seen to be doing this. Is
yeah.
there a way that we can kindly
Yeah, that's
introduce
hugely,
it?
that's so common. It's so important. There's so often that I have a student, I think, oh, if I give them a choice, they'll go to the mat because they think, oh, yoga's done on a mat. Or they won't use a prop because they think they have to do more. And that more is always better. I think we have to do a better job teaching yoga to helping them remember that more isn't better. That actually in yoga,
Mhm.
less is more, that more subtle is more advanced. And I think we can do that by modeling it. So, for example, if I were to teach a class where I had a student who I wanted to practice in a chair, I would practice in a chair. I would demo from the chair. And I think as a teacher, show them that that's how this pose is done. Or I would literally have everyone do it in the chair. Like I would try to have
Mhm.
chairs available for all the students. And maybe let's say, today let's do a short chair practice. And then you can either stay in the chair or get on the mat. So that at least you're kind of making the chair part of your normal class anyway. I think everyone benefits from chair yoga. You can tell them, here's stuff that you could do when you're at your desk, or if you're on a train or on a bus or even in the car, or I mean, people spend so much time seated. I think we can all benefit from learning that chair yoga. But I
Mhm.
think you're right to really think of creative ways to address that issue of that kind of competitiveness thinking that I can't use a prop. I need to do more. Yeah.
Mhm. And then Aspen has asked in the chat, any tips on how to bring these mixed level classes into the community setting or to introduce to studio
I
owners?
mean, I have two very different thoughts about it. On the one hand, I want to say that when you create a mixed level class that's welcoming to all levels, you're actually opening up the possibilities of students that who could come. And so I think it's financially beneficial to a studio to offer options for different levels of practitioners, right? You're opening up to more people. So you could say, let's create a class where people can bring, like their parents, like so that a young person can come and have their parent there with them and they can practice together. Something like that. At the same time, I also recognize that oftentimes people who are interested in accessible yoga, who would do chair yoga, may not be willing to come into a yoga studio. Like sometimes studios are not welcoming environments and they're not designed to welcome those people, disabled people or older people into their spaces because they tend to be um, what is it? Homogenous groups. You know what I mean? They tend to be like certain people look all the same and practice the same. And that's too bad. Like that's really a loss for everyone, I think.
Mhm.
So I often suggest if you really want to teach accessible yoga, you might have to go into the community actually and
Mhm.
create classes at the library, through hospital wellness programs, or through one thing I find really effective actually is to work through support groups. So if you have a connection to some particular disability or a condition like stroke or heart disease or cancer or whatever it is, you can sometimes connect to that support group. Or it could be a grief support group, or it could be for anything. But anytime a group of people come together, it's a nice time to offer yoga. You could say, I'll come and do one free session for your group. And then if you like it, I can come back. I don't know, just sometimes we have to be creative with this stuff.
Mhm. I love that idea. Using a prop is not finding the easiest way out, but the smartest way in. I like that.
Yeah, props are really misunderstood because there's some research that showed that you might actually there might actually be more injury with prop usage than less, which I thought was really interesting. But props don't make anything easier or harder. They're neutral. And I think that props are misunderstood in yoga. We've been using them for thousands of years. There's sculptures of yogis from 2,000 years ago using yoga straps to sit in meditation. They'd strap their legs so they can sit longer. And so they're not new and they're not really making anything easier. They actually can make a pose more challenging. So I feel like we just neutralize them. They're just tools that we have at our disposal.
Mhm. And I want to make sure that I share some links here in the chat.
Mm,
So first of all, there's one about offering tree, and we'll send all of these out by email as well. So don't worry if you
okay.
don't grab them. But also, Jivana has a free webinar coming up on February 24th, which is this Monday. Is that next Monday?
Yeah, next Monday I have another free webinar at the same time as this, actually, for my accessible yoga training online. And that one is on
Mhm.
sequencing. So it's about how to sequence and plan accessible yoga classes. So you're welcome to sign up. Oh, there's a link. Thank you. So people can sign
Yeah,
up for that.
balance
And I
instructions
have a
go to me.
full accessible yoga training online that starts March 6th. That's basically our 50-hour foundation training. And I'd love people to join me for that. It's really fun and we get to spend more time. I felt a little rushed today. I've covered a lot. I hope it's okay.
It
But
was
in the
great.
training, we can do this stuff slower and we practice and stuff.
And I want to make sure that we share your Instagram handle as well. I'll share it in the link because if you ever want to see some
Uh,
really big yoga poses demonstrated in a chair, you're going to see those on Jivana's Instagram profile. Is it Instagram/Jivana for your personal for
I
your
mean, I'm
own?
Jivana Heyman. Yeah, Jivana Heyman so yeah, if you can find me, I can share probably. Yeah, that's true. That
Look at
actually on Instagram, what I've done is I've demonstrated a lot of mixed level practices. So I've tried to create a visual of this for people, and they've been very popular. Like I do reels where I have someone doing a very intense practice, and I do a chair version. It's fun to do. Um,
I love it. There we
yeah.
go. That's
All
oh,
right.
you dropped it there too. Yeah,
We
it's
both
there in
did.
the chat. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everybody who was here live. And oh, we had one question from Dagmar really quickly. Dagmar asked if they could use your DEI slides for a presentation they're doing in the community. So maybe if Dagmar emails, you can email hello at Offering Tree. We can connect you with Jivana, or what's the best way for them to get in touch, Jivana?
Yeah, I have a contact on my website, accessibleyoga.org. I'll put that in there. There's a contact form on accessibleyoga.org. You can reach out and ask us anything. Yeah, usually I let people use them if they give me credit, or something. It's nice to give people credit.
Cool. Okay, so Dagmar can reach you there, or if
Yeah,
anyone needs anything or wants to follow up with anything, you can always reply to the email that you're going to get, or Offering Tree is available at any time by email, hello@offeringtree.com. We want to hear from you, and we're glad that you're here today, and we're especially glad that Jivana is here today. Thank you so much, Jivana. This was awesome.
thank you.
Lots
Thanks.
of takeaways again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate it.
Problem. Okay, everyone, thank you so much.